soldier deployed in Afghanistan suddenly receives an urgent message from his family. When he secretly returns home, there are loud cries and screams. He walks in and... The wind scraped restlessly against the canvas walls of the barracks, filling the room with the dry, restless sighs of the desert night in Afghanistan. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, a distant convoy grumbled over the dunes, their headlights thin and ghostly under the darkening sky. Inside, the air smelled of dust, diesel, and worn canvas, a smell Harold Clark had long since accepted as the scent of his second home. He sat on the narrow cot, his broad shoulders hunched under the dim light of a hanging bulb, his calloused fingers adjusting the photo pinned carefully above his bed. The edges of the picture were beginning to curl, the once vivid colors fading into a tired sepia. Brenda's smile was frozen mid-laughter, her hand resting protectively on Amy's slender shoulder. Anna, still barely a toddler when the photo was taken, clutched a battered teddy bear against her chest, her dark hair falling over one eye. Harold stared at the image, letting his fingers brush the paper as if the touch could somehow bridge the thousands of miles between them. The barracks were nearly empty tonight, most of the men either on duty or snatching precious hours of sleep. Even the usual low hum of conversation was missing, leaving only the rattle of the canvas and the steady drip of a leaking pipe near the wash basin. His watch beeped quietly. Time for the video call. Harold pulled his laptop closer, the casing battered from years of service, and clicked into the connection. The screen flickered, strained by the distance, before finally stabilizing into the familiar scene of his living room back home. Brenda was there, sitting stiffly on the couch. Amy perched beside her, waving enthusiastically, her missing front tooth giving her a lopsided grin. "Hi, Daddy," Amy chirped, bouncing slightly. "Hey, Peanut," Harold said, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You're getting bigger every time I see you." Brenda offered a small smile, her eyes shadowed with something Harold couldn't quite read. "Say hi, Anna," she prompted, nudging the small figure tucked tightly against her side. Anna didn't wave. She didn't even look up. Her face was half hidden against Brenda's arm, and when she did lift her gaze, Harold caught it. A faint shadow, a bruise high on her cheekbone, just below the temple. It was faint, as if already healing, but unmistakable. "Hey, sweet pea," Harold said gently. "What's wrong, baby girl? You feeling sick?" Anna didn't respond. She only pressed her face deeper into her mother's side. Brenda shifted, adjusting Anna's position without meeting Harold's gaze. "She's fine," she said quickly. "Had her shots yesterday. Fever's been making her a little clingy, that's all." Harold frowned. "You sure that's all it is? She looks off." "It's normal," Brenda insisted, smoothing Anna's hair. "You know how she is with vaccines, sensitive. She'll be back to her old self in no time." There was a tightness in Brenda's voice he hadn't noticed before. Amy, oblivious, launched into a rambling story about her spelling test and the macaroni art project she was making for school. Harold forced himself to focus, nodding and smiling at all the right moments, but his eyes kept drifting back to Anna, who stayed silent throughout the call. After a while, Brenda shifted again, her smile strained. "We should probably let you get some rest, Harold. You've got an early patrol, right?" "Yeah," Harold said slowly. "Early." He watched the screen freeze for a moment. Brenda's face caught mid-blink before the connection dropped into static. The laptop's screen faded to black, leaving Harold staring at his own faint reflection. He sat there for a long moment, the loneliness pressing in heavier than usual, the barracks around him feeling larger, emptier. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the walls with a dry, hollow sound that reminded him of bones knocking together. It was a cold night, even in the desert. Harold pulled out a battered notebook from his duffel, flipping past sketches Amy had mailed him and half-finished letters he never sent. He clicked on his pen, the sound sharp in the silence, and began to write. "Dear Amy and Anna," he wrote slowly, his hand steady despite the tightness in his chest. "Daddy misses you more than anything. I hope you're being good for Mommy and taking care of each other while I'm away. I'm counting the days until I can come home and take you both out for ice cream, just like we used to do." The words felt mechanical, distant, like he was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to comfort them. Harold paused, staring down at the half-finished sentence, the pen heavy in his hand. A gust of wind rattled the canvas again, and somewhere the faint smell of smoke drifted through the seams. He closed the notebook without signing it. There were things a father should be able to fix: a scraped knee, a nightmare, a fight between sisters. But staring into that tiny, trembling face tonight, Harold had felt helpless for the first time in a long time. Something wasn't right. He had seen it, felt it, and there was nothing he could do from half a world away. Sighing heavily, he slid into the cot, the springs creaking under his weight. He stared up at the dark canvas ceiling, the fabric bowing slightly in the desert wind, and tried to empty his mind. But the image of Anna's bruised, silent face hovered just behind his closed eyes, refusing to let him go. The late afternoon sun stretched long fingers across the faded hardwood floors, dust swirling lazily in the quiet golden haze. Outside, somewhere beyond the neatly trimmed hedges of their suburban neighborhood, a dog barked and a lawnmower droned, its distant rumble slipping in and out like a tired sigh. Inside the house, the atmosphere was heavier, filled with the clatter of a pan on the stove and the faint, rhythmic sound of a wooden spoon scraping against a pot. Brenda stood in the narrow kitchen, stirring a sauce that had started to stick at the bottom. Her hair, once neatly pinned, had loosened in frazzled strands around her face. The small window above the sink let in a wedge of sunlight, sharp and hot against the tiled counter. In the living room, Amy and Anna played, or at least Amy played. Anna, smaller and quieter, followed her sister's lead as best she could, trailing behind with a battered doll clasped to her chest. The carpet was strewn with crayons, puzzle pieces, and the crumpled remnants of a coloring book page Amy had abandoned halfway through. "Catch it, Anna," Amy called, her voice high and eager. Anna, clutching the doll tightly, looked uncertain. Amy was balancing one of Brenda's porcelain dinner plates on her palms, wobbling as she tried to spin it like a toy. Anna shook her head slightly, her small feet shuffling backward. "Don't be a baby," Amy teased, tilting the plate dangerously as she took a few running steps. The plate flew. It was not graceful. It clipped the arm of the couch, spun awkwardly in the air, and crashed onto the floor with a sharp, splitting crack. A jagged silence fell over the room, broken only by the frantic skittering of the pieces across the hardwood. For a moment, both girls froze. Then, footsteps. Heavy, fast, coming from the kitchen. Brenda appeared in the doorway, her face flushed from the heat of the stove, a thin line of anger already tightening her mouth. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the stillness. Amy, without missing a beat, pointed a trembling finger at Anna. "She did it," she said. "Anna knocked it down." Anna, clutching her doll tighter, looked up with wide, bewildered eyes. Her lips parted as if to protest, but no sound came out, only a soft, shuddering breath. Brenda's gaze sharpened. She didn't ask for clarification. She didn't look at the angles, the distances, the trembling in Anna's hands. "You clumsy little thing," Brenda snapped, crossing the room in 2 strides. Anna flinched backward instinctively, but there was nowhere to run. Brenda grabbed her by the arm, not roughly, but not gently either, and with a swift, mechanical motion, delivered 2 sharp spanks to the back of her legs. "No dinner for you tonight if you can't behave," Brenda said through gritted teeth. Anna's doll slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. The sob that escaped from Anna's chest was raw, more confusion than pain, a sound so small it seemed to shrink her body where she stood. She bent down, scooping up her doll, burying her face against it as though she could hide there. Amy stood off to the side, her arms folded, eyes darting between her mother and her sister. There was a flicker of something in her expression. Not triumph exactly, but a wary sort of guilt she didn't know how to name yet. Brenda, breathing heavily, turned back toward the kitchen without another word. The smell of something burning filled the air, but she didn't seem to notice. Anna sank down onto the floor, sitting cross-legged amidst the shards of the broken plate, silent tears cutting clean tracks down her dirty cheeks. The evening dragged itself slowly into night. Dinner was served, and Amy ate with animated chatter, filling the silence Brenda didn't bother to break. Anna sat quietly, poking at her food, too afraid to ask for another helping, even when her stomach twisted in hunger. No one mentioned the broken plate again. The next morning, the house was still wrapped in a brittle sort of quiet. Brenda handed Anna her small, worn backpack at the door without a glance, her attention already on Amy's gleaming lunchbox and braided hair. Anna clutched the bag to her chest, her thumb worrying the frayed strap as they walked to the bus stop. When the school bus doors folded open with a mechanical hiss, Amy bounded up the steps, calling out greetings to friends. Anna climbed up more cautiously, the hem of her sweater brushing the grimy edge of the steps. At school, the day unfolded in long, colorless stretches. Anna did her best to shrink into the edges of the classroom, her hand never raising when the teacher asked questions, her voice never loud enough to carry. It didn't matter. No one really noticed. At recess, she wandered near the swings, where the bigger kids ruled with loud laughter and careless hands. Someone yanked the ribbon from her hair as she passed. Another child, she didn't even know his name, flicked the back of her ear and laughed when she winced. She didn't cry. She didn't run to the teacher. She simply moved to a different corner of the playground, clutching her arms around herself, watching the blur of movement and color from a safe distance. No one missed her. Later that afternoon, the school's main office buzzed with low voices and the occasional shrill ring of the phone. Miss Carver, Anna's homeroom teacher, sat behind her desk, hesitating a moment before lifting the receiver to her ear. She dialed the number listed under Parent Contact for Anna. The line clicked, rang twice, and then Brenda's voice answered, distracted. "Hello? Mrs. Clark? This is Miss Carver, Anna's teacher," the woman said gently. "Do you have a moment?" There was a pause, a rustle of fabric as if Brenda were shifting the phone from one shoulder to the other. "Yeah, sure. What's this about?" Ms. Carver chose her words carefully. "I just wanted to check in. I've noticed that Anna seems a little withdrawn lately. She tends to stay on the fringes during group activities, and today—" She hesitated slightly. "There were a few incidents at recess, some teasing from other children. Nothing too severe, but I thought it best to bring it to your attention." On the other end, Brenda sighed, a soft, impatient sound. "Kids will be kids," she said. "Anna's sensitive. Always has been." "I understand," Miss Carver said, her voice still kind. "But sometimes, even minor teasing can build up and affect a child's confidence. It might help if she had some extra support at home, maybe just a little more encouragement." Brenda's tone cooled noticeably. "Look, I appreciate your concern, but Anna's fine. She's not made of glass. She'll toughen up." Miss Carver pressed her lips together for a moment, then said quietly, "All right, Mrs. Clark. Thank you for your time." The call ended with a curt goodbye. When the final bell rang, Anna boarded the bus home alone, sitting in the second-to-last seat by the window. She pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the world slip by in smudged colors, her small breath fogging tiny circles on the pane. When they pulled up to the stop, she saw Brenda's figure waiting at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, gaze impatient, even from a distance. Anna stood, gathering her bag, stepping carefully over a crumpled juice box someone had left in the aisle. She didn't hurry. There was no point in hurrying anymore. As she stepped off the bus, she glanced once toward the playground, now empty and littered with candy wrappers and forgotten jackets. A single swing moved in the wind, creaking softly in the cool air. The house loomed ahead of her like a silent warning. Anna tightened her grip on her backpack and walked slowly toward it, each step heavier than the last, the weight of the day pressing down harder on her small shoulders. The evening deepened slowly, the sunlight draining from the sky until only a dusky blue smudged the windows. In the kitchen, the heavy scent of melting cheese clung stubbornly to the air, thick and almost suffocating. Brenda moved with unusual lightness as she stirred the pot of spaghetti. Her lips curved into something close to a smile, a rare sight these days. "Your favorite," she said brightly, glancing over her shoulder where Amy was setting the table with an exaggerated flourish. "You earned it, sweetie. Straight A's deserve something special." Amy giggled, twirling once in the middle of the kitchen before plunking herself into her chair. Anna followed behind her, quieter, smaller somehow, as if she was trying to occupy as little space as possible. Brenda placed the steaming dish in the center of the table with a small flourish. The noodles glistened under a thick layer of cheese, the smell sharp and heavy. "Dig in," Brenda said cheerfully, handing a heaping plate to Amy, who wasted no time twirling the spaghetti around her fork, lifting a mountain of cheese-drenched pasta to her mouth. Anna stared at her own plate. She didn't touch it. Brenda noticed almost immediately. "What's wrong now?" Anna shifted in her seat, clutching the hem of her sweater. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. I can't. It makes me sick." Brenda's smile evaporated. Her jaw tightened. "That's all there is," she said, her voice flat. "If you don't eat, you go hungry." Anna glanced down again at the plate, the smell making her stomach twist. She knew what happened when she ate cheese. She also knew what happened when she refused. Her small hand trembled as she picked up her fork. Across the table, Amy chattered on about her school project, oblivious or pretending to be. Brenda nodded absently, her eyes sharp on Anna, as if daring her to refuse. The first bite slid reluctantly down Anna's throat, the greasy warmth clinging to her tongue. Her stomach recoiled almost immediately, but she forced herself to chew, to swallow, to smile weakly when Brenda looked her way. She ate 3 more bites before she couldn't force herself anymore. She set her fork down, her hands slick with sweat. No one noticed. No one cared. The hours dragged by. Amy finished her meal, bouncing from the table with a pleased little hum. Brenda gathered the plates without comment, her movements brisk and efficient. Anna slipped from her chair and curled up on the couch, her head tucked into the corner, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. The first wave of nausea hit before the dishes were even dry. She tried to be quiet about it, tried not to whimper when her skin broke out in burning, itchy patches, or when her throat began to close slowly, as if an invisible hand was wrapping itself around her neck. Brenda sat on the recliner, scrolling through her phone, her face lit in the ghostly glow of the screen. "Mommy," Anna whispered hoarsely. "Mommy, it hurts." Brenda didn't look up. "You're fine if you go to bed now." Anna slid off the couch, her knees buckling slightly, and made her way toward the stairs. Every step felt heavier than the last, her breath coming in shallow, wheezing gasps. By the time she reached the landing, her legs gave out completely, and she crumpled to the floor with a soft, broken sound. It was Amy who found her. "Mom!" Amy's voice cut through the air, high and sharp. "Mom, something's wrong with Anna." Brenda sighed heavily, as if she were being asked to move mountains. She rose slowly, irritation etched into every line of her body. But when she saw Anna's small form sprawled out on the carpet, saw the violent red rash blooming across her arms and neck, her expression finally shifted, not to panic, not to fear, but to cold calculation. A minute later, the car roared down the quiet street, Anna bundled in the back seat, her head lolling weakly against the window. The town blurred past, darkened storefronts, blinking traffic lights, the occasional figure hunched against the night. At the hospital, the emergency lights buzzed overhead, throwing long, tired shadows across the cracked pavement. Brenda pulled Anna from the car without tenderness, carrying her into the fluorescent-lit waiting room where tired parents and sick children slumped in battered chairs. She did not cradle Anna. She did not speak soft reassurances into her hair. She only walked steadily forward, her arms locked stiffly around the limp weight of her daughter, as if she were carrying a heavy package she could not wait to set down. The automatic doors hissed shut behind them. Inside, under the indifferent hum of the hospital lights, Anna disappeared into the hands of strangers. The morning light was weak, struggling to push through the heavy clouds that sagged low over the rooftops. The streets glistened from a night of light rain, and a few lonely puddles clung stubbornly to the edges of the sidewalk. A battered newspaper fluttered along the curb, caught and released by the listless breeze. Inside the Clark house, the air was busy and thin, charged with the restless excitement that belonged only to Amy. She raced from room to room, her laughter high and insistent, while Brenda gathered bags by the door with an air of efficient detachment. "Hurry up, Amy," Brenda called over her shoulder. "We don't want to be late for the park." Anna stood quietly near the staircase, her hands twisted into the hem of her shirt. Her shoes were already on, her little backpack slung over one shoulder. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask if she was coming. Brenda noticed her finally, turning with a sigh. "You're going to Mrs. Teresa's today," she said, brushing Anna's hair back roughly from her forehead. "We'll be back later." Anna nodded once, small and obedient. Brenda knelt, not with affection, but to zip up Anna's jacket. Her hands were brisk, businesslike. "Be good, Anna. Don't cause trouble." Amy bounded past them, nearly knocking Anna off balance, and Brenda laughed lightly. She opened the door, the cold air rushing in, and steered Anna down the walkway toward the modest house next door. Mrs. Teresa was already waiting on the porch, her wide figure wrapped in a heavy sweater, a book balanced, forgotten on her knee. "Morning, Brenda," Teresa said, her voice gravelly but kind. "And you two little ladies." "Good morning, Mrs. Teresa," Amy chirped, beaming. Brenda smiled tightly. "Thanks for watching Anna for me," she said. "Amy and I are headed to the amusement park. Just the two of us today." Teresa's eyes shifted to Anna, who stood half hidden behind her mother's leg, staring down at her shoes. "Why not take Anna along?" Teresa asked gently, crouching slightly to Anna's height. "She might enjoy the rides too." Brenda straightened her shoulders. Her voice was light, casual. "Anna's not good in crowds. She tends to run off, doesn't listen well. Last time we tried something like this, she nearly got herself lost." She laughed softly, a brittle sound. "It's just easier this way." Teresa nodded slowly, but her gaze lingered on Anna's face. She saw the way the little girl flinched at the sound of her mother's voice, how her small body seemed to fold inward on itself, as if trying to disappear. "Well, we'll have our own fun, won't we, sweet pea?" Teresa said, extending her hand. Anna hesitated, then slipped her fingers into Teresa's palm. Brenda barely waited. "Be good," she called over her shoulder, already striding back to the car where Amy was waiting. The engine coughed to life, and then they were gone, a cloud of dust rising briefly in their wake. Teresa squeezed Anna's hand gently. "Come on inside, darling," she said. "Let's find something nice to do." The house smelled of cinnamon and clean linen, a soft, comforting scent that filled the small rooms without overwhelming them. Teresa led Anna into the kitchen, bustling gently about as she made a pot of oatmeal, adding a splash of cream and a spoonful of brown sugar without asking. Anna sat at the table, her feet dangling above the floor, the battered doll she carried clutched tightly in her arms. It was then that Teresa noticed the bruises, faint but present, just below the sleeves of Anna's jacket, along her thin wrists. A darker shadow bloomed near the edge of her jaw, partly hidden by a fall of hair. Teresa said nothing at first. She set the bowl of oatmeal in front of Anna, then pulled out a chair across from her, lowering herself into it with a quiet sigh. "You sure you don't want to come to the fair next time?" Teresa asked casually, stirring her own cup of tea. "It's no fun if you miss out." Anna blinked up at her, spoon paused mid-air. "I'm not good," she whispered. "I get lost." Teresa leaned her elbows on the table, resting her chin in her hand. "Who told you that?" Anna didn't answer. Her eyes dropped to her bowl, and she shoveled a quick bite into her mouth, as if that would make the conversation go away. Teresa let the silence stretch a little, filling it not with pressure, but with warmth, with patience. After a moment, Anna spoke again, voice so soft, Teresa had to lean forward to hear. "Mummy says, it's better if I stay," Anna said, "so Amy can have fun." Teresa felt something tighten sharply in her chest. "Have anything else?" "Difficult things," Teresa continued. "My tummy hurts, sometimes," Anna said quietly, without looking up. Teresa's hands stilled on the yarn. "Does it now?" she said, keeping her voice light. Anna nodded. "Sometimes. Mummy says it's 'cause I'm picky." Teresa leaned back in her chair, watching the child with careful eyes. There were faint bruises along Anna's arms, fading yellow and green, like the last breath of a storm. "Do you get to play outside much, sweetheart?" Teresa asked. Anna shook her head. "I play with Dolly." She pulled a frayed, much-loved doll from her backpack and hugged it close. Teresa's throat tightened, but she kept her face gentle. "Dolly's a good friend, I reckon." Anna nodded solemnly. There was something broken in the way the little girl clung to the doll, something that made Teresa's chest ache. She asked a few more questions, softly, carefully, letting Anna answer or not as she chose. The picture that emerged was not painted in bold strokes, but in little things. Missed meals, harsh words, long afternoons spent alone. Teresa listened, her heart growing heavier with each piece. When Anna grew tired, Teresa tucked her onto the couch with a soft quilt, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. The house grew quiet, except for the steady tick of the clock on the mantel and the soft, even sound of Anna's breathing. Teresa stood at the window, staring out at the empty street. She wasn't naive. She had seen enough of the world to know the signs, the silences that spoke louder than any words. Harold. The name came to her suddenly, the father Brenda spoke of only rarely now, the soldier somewhere across the sea. Teresa rose from her chair and crossed to the telephone mounted on the kitchen wall. Her fingers hesitated over the numbers. It wasn't her place. It wasn't her business. And yet, how could she turn away? She pulled the wrinkled piece of paper from the drawer where she kept emergency contacts, scanned it quickly, and dialed the number listed for Harold's base. The line crackled, faint and distant. A woman's voice answered. "United States Military Operations, Fort McKenzie." "This is Teresa Miller," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I need to get a message to Sergeant Harold Clark. It's about his family. It's urgent." There was a pause, a click of keys. "What's the message?" the woman asked. Teresa looked over her shoulder at Anna, who sat small and silent on the worn armchair, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Just tell him," Teresa said, her voice breaking slightly. "Urgent family matter." Please respond. The woman repeated the words back to her, clipped and professional, and then the call was over. Teresa hung up the phone with a hand that trembled slightly. The midday sun burned mercilessly over the Afghan desert, bleaching the rocky hills into ghostly shapes that shimmered against the horizon. A brittle wind scraped fine sand across the tarmac, whispering along the edges of the barracks like restless voices. Sergeant Harold Clark wiped the sweat from his brow as he jogged off the drill field, boots kicking up dust. His body was moving on muscle memory, the day's training exercises a blur of commands and formation changes. But his mind was elsewhere, stubbornly pulled toward the weight lodged deep in his gut since he had woken. He barely had time to unsling his pack before one of the comm officers waved him over. "Clark," the young man called, holding up a note scribbled hastily on a scrap of lined paper. "You've got a message. Civilian." Harold took it, frowning as he read the cramped handwriting. "Urgent family matter. Please respond." No sender name, no details. Just those few clipped words, like a pebble dropped into the vast silence between him and home. A chill prickled the back of his neck, despite the searing heat. Without hesitation, he crossed to the communications tent, asked to be patched through to the number attached to the message. The satellite line crackled once, twice, and then connected. "Hello?" a familiar voice answered, rough with age, but steady. "Mrs. Teresa," Harold said, tension crackling under his skin. "It's Harold Clark." There was a beat of silence, then a heavy sigh. "Thank God," Teresa said. "I was afraid they wouldn't find you." Harold felt his stomach tighten. "What's going on?" Teresa hesitated for a moment, as if weighing every word. "It's Anna," she said finally. "It's Brenda's leaving her with me, often. Says it's easier if Anna doesn't go with them. Says Anna gets lost or causes trouble." Harold closed his eyes briefly, the words scraping raw against his heart. Teresa pressed on, her voice low but firm. "Harold, I've seen bruises on her. I've seen how she flinches when someone raises their voice. She doesn't smile. She barely speaks unless you coax her." Harold gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. "Anna's not just lonely, Harold," Teresa said. "She's scared. She's fading, like no one sees her." The line crackled again, the long distance feeling unbearably vast. "I know it's not easy for you," Teresa said gently, "but if you can, son, you need to come home. Sooner rather than later." Harold swallowed hard, his throat thick. "Thank you," he said roughly. "Thank you for telling me." "You come home to that little girl," Teresa said, her voice trembling just slightly, "before she disappears completely." The call ended with a soft click, but her words hung in the air long after. The barracks buzzed with the low murmur of off-duty soldiers, card games, quiet laughter, the clink of metal cups. Harold logged into the secured satellite connection later that night, the video call connecting with a stuttering series of beeps. The screen flickered, and there they were. The familiar sight of his living room, the worn couch, the scuffed coffee table, the picture frames lining the mantel. Brenda sat perched on the edge of the couch, a little too stiff, her smile stretching almost unnaturally. "Hey, honey," she said brightly, waving. Amy popped up beside her, waving both arms. "Hi, Daddy. We went to the park today. Mummy bought me ice cream." Harold smiled automatically, feeling the unease sink deeper. "That's great, Peanut," he said, his voice rough with affection. "Sounds like you had a big day." Brenda laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It was nice," she said. Both girls had a blast. You should have seen Anna chasing Bubbles all over the park. Harold's eyes flickered to the background. Anna sat on the floor, half shadowed by the couch, cradling her battered doll. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't playing. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, her head ducked low as if she were trying to disappear. When she glanced up, her eyes locked with Harold's for a fraction of a second. Wide, uncertain, almost pleading. Then she dropped her gaze, her fingers tightening around the doll's worn dress. Harold felt something clench inside him. "Hey, Pumpkin," he said, pitching his voice softer. "Did you have fun today?" Anna didn't answer. She flinched almost imperceptibly, her shoulders curling inward. Brenda's laugh rang out again, too loud, too quick. "She's just shy tonight," Brenda said, waving a dismissive hand. "Probably tired from running around all day in park." Harold forced a smile, nodding slowly. "Yeah, that makes sense." It was obvious that the girl had been with Teresa all day. His wife was lying, Amy was covering for her mother, and Anna was still cowering. But Harold didn't expose her right away. He knew something was fishy. "Looks like you're doing a great job holding down the fort," Harold said lightly. Brenda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. We're managing just fine." The call ended a few minutes later. Goodbyes hurried, Brenda citing bath time, bedtime, routines to keep. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, undeniably wrong. He rose from the battered couch in the corner of the tent, pushing the chair back with a scrape across the concrete floor. Without hesitation, Harold headed for the operations tent. Inside, the night buzzed with low voices and the static hum of radios. A single overhead bulb swung slightly in the dry breeze, casting long, restless shadows across the canvas walls. Harold approached the duty officer, a stern woman named Sergeant Levin, who looked up from her clipboard. "I need to put in for emergency leave," Harold said, his voice steady. Levin raised an eyebrow. "Problem back home?" Harold nodded once. "Family emergency. I just got the message." There was a brief silence as she assessed him. Then she nodded, setting her clipboard aside. "Paperwork's a mess, but I'll push it through," she said. "You'll be on the first transport we can arrange, but it still might be a week or two." Harold inclined his head, grateful. "Thank you, Sergeant." As he turned away, his hand brushed against the pocket where the slip of paper still rested. The morning sky over Virginia was the color of old iron, a low, wet drizzle clinging to the earth like a second skin. The tarmac was slick beneath Harold's boots as he stepped off the transport plane, a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He paused for a moment on the stairs, breathing in the heavy air, feeling the bite of it in his lungs. America. Home. But not the home he had left behind. The drive from the base to the town blurred into a grey ribbon, lined with trees stripped bare by the creeping fingers of late autumn. Harold kept one hand tight on the steering wheel, the other clenching and unclenching restlessly in his lap. Every mile brought a tightening to his chest, a beat of dread that grew louder than the rain pattering against the windshield. When he turned onto his street, the world seemed to sharpen around him. Did you hear this story before or after lunch? If it was before, comment cucumber. If you were full, comment tomato. The Clark house sat hunched against the gloomy morning, its paint peeling a little more than he remembered, the front lawn untended. The curtains were half drawn, casting long, thin shadows across the porch. Harold pulled to the curb, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, listening. At first, there was only the wet hush of the rain and the distant bark of a dog. And then, he heard it. A thin, broken sob, high and keening. Anna. His pulse thudded in his ears. He left the car door swinging open and strode up the walkway, boots splashing through shallow puddles. As he neared the porch, voices sharpened out of the damp air. "You never listen!" Brenda's voice, sharp as shattered glass. I'm sorry." Anna's small voice, cracked and breathless. "Stop crying. I swear, Anna, if you keep this up, you'll sleep beside trash." Through the thin walls, another voice cut in, Amy's, cool and dismissive. "Why did Mum have to have another kid anyway?" she muttered. "We were fine before." Harold didn't remember reaching for the doorknob, didn't remember the door crashing open against the wall. All he remembered was the sight before him. The living room was dim, the blinds drawn tight. The air stank of old food and stale anger. Toys were scattered carelessly across the floor, dishes stacked on end tables, a sweater lying crumpled in the corner like a shed skin. Brenda stood over Anna, her face twisted in rage, her finger jabbing the air. Anna sat crumpled on the carpet, her thin arms wrapped around herself, her head bowed low. Harold's eyes locked on her, and the world tilted. Her skin was blotched with angry red rashes, the telltale bloom of an allergic reaction spreading viciously up her neck and arms. Her cheeks were flushed a sickly crimson, and even from where he stood, Harold could see the high, unnatural shine of fever, sweat on her forehead. A cheap cooling patch clung crookedly to her brow, already curling at the edges. Her breathing was fast and shallow, her tiny chest heaving against the too big sweatshirt she wore. For one breathless moment, the house fell silent. Then, Harold moved. Without a word, he crossed the room in 3 strides. Brenda turned, startled. "Harold," she stammered. What are you doing here?" But Harold didn't answer. He didn't spare her a glance. He crouched low, reaching for Anna, with hands that trembled despite all his training, all his years of discipline. Anna flinched instinctively, her body shrinking from the sudden movement. "Hey, baby girl," Harold said, voice breaking on the endearment. "Daddy's got you." He slid one arm under her knees, the other behind her back, lifting her carefully into his arms. She was so light, too light, her skin frighteningly hot against him. Anna whimpered softly, her small fingers curling weakly into his jacket. Harold straightened slowly, turning his back deliberately on Brenda and Amy, who sat frozen on the couch, her arms crossed over her chest, face blank. He said nothing to them. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the rain had thickened into a steady sheet, washing the grime from the gutters and soaking Harold's hair as he carried Anna to the car. The engine roared to life, headlights slicing through the grey gloom. He drove one-handed, the other pressed protectively around Anna, feeling every ragged breath she drew, every tremor of her fevered body. The hospital wasn't far, but every second dragged like a stone around his neck. Inside the emergency room, under the indifferent glare of fluorescent lights, nurses swarmed around them, voices brisk and efficient. Someone took Anna from his arms, laying her on a gurney. Someone else started barking questions at him. What happened? How long had she been like this? Allergies? Medications? Harold answered mechanically, his voice hoarse. He stood rooted to the spot as they wheeled Anna away through swinging double doors, the white of her socks the last thing he saw before she disappeared down the hall. For a moment, he simply stood there, fists clenched at his sides, heart hammering painfully against his ribs. He had trusted, and now he had seen. Whatever illusions he had clung to about his family, about Brenda, about the life they had built, they shattered like brittle glass beneath the weight of what had been done to his little girl. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed faintly overhead, casting a harsh white glow across the linoleum floor. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and worn-out hope. Harold sat stiffly in the plastic chair by Anna's bedside, his elbows digging into his knees, his fists clenched so tightly they ached. Anna lay still, terrifyingly still, her small chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. The fourth line in her hand looked grotesque against her delicate skin, the bruises blossoming like dark flowers up her thin arms. He couldn't stop staring. couldn't stop counting the seconds between each fragile breath. A soft knock stirred him. He lifted his head to see a doctor, a young man with weary eyes and a clipboard tucked under his arm, step gently into the room. "Mr. Clark," the doctor said, voice low, respectful. Harold stood immediately, his whole body coiled tight. "How is she?" The doctor hesitated, glancing at the tiny form on the bed. "Your daughter was severely dehydrated when she arrived," he began carefully. "She also suffered an anaphylactic reaction, most likely from dairy exposure. She's stabilized for now, but—" He paused, choosing his words with clinical precision. "It was close. A few more hours without treatment, and we could be having a very different conversation." Harold closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the words slamming into him like a fist. His hands shook at his sides. "How long?" he rasped. "How long was she like this?" The doctor shook his head. "Hard to say exactly, but this wasn't recent. She's also showing signs of prolonged malnutrition and chronic stress." He met Harold's eyes, something almost like accusation flickering behind his professional calm. This didn't happen overnight. Harold swallowed the rising nausea. "She's safe now, right?" "For now, yes," the doctor said, "but she'll need monitoring and a safer environment." The implication was sharp, unmistakable. Harold nodded stiffly, his throat burning. "Thank you, doctor." When the man left, Harold sat back down heavily, dragging a shaking hand over his face. He leaned over Anna's bed, lowering his forehead to the rail, breathing in her faint, fever-sour scent. "I swear to you, baby girl," he whispered hoarsely, "I will never let anyone hurt you again." The house felt different when Harold returned. Not just messy, not just abandoned, poisoned. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air hit him like a wall, the sour tang of rotting food, the heavy stink of something deeper, something mean and moldy. Brenda sat on the recliner, legs crossed, arms folded across her chest. Amy sprawled on the couch, her face lit coldly by the blue glow of her tablet. Neither of them looked up as he entered. Neither of them seemed surprised. Harold closed the door carefully behind him. Then he spoke, and his voice was not loud, but it was lethal. "What the hell have you done?" Brenda didn't flinch. She tossed her hair over one shoulder and shrugged. "Overreacting again," she said lightly. "Like always." Harold's blood pounded in his ears. "Anna is in the hospital," he said, each word carved from stone. "The doctor said if she had stayed one more night without help, she would have died." Amy looked up then, her expression a mixture of boredom and irritation. "You're fighting about her again," she said, sighing loudly. "That kid always causes problems. She's why everything's bad." Harold's fists clenched so hard, he felt the bones grind. He turned to Amy first, and his voice, when it came, was low and cold enough to crack glass. "She is your sister," he said, "and if you ever speak about her like that again, you and I will have a very different conversation." Amy shrank back into the couch, her mouth tightening into a sullen line. Harold turned back to Brenda. "You let her suffer," he said, his voice trembling now. Not from fear, but from the impossible pressure of all the rage and betrayal clawing at his ribs. "You let her starve. You let her burn with fever while you sat here doing nothing." Brenda's face hardened, her eyes glittering with a hatred so cold it froze the room. "I have only one daughter," she said evenly. "Amy." That's it. For a second, Harold could only stare at her, at the woman he had once promised to protect, at the woman who had promised to love the children they brought into the world. He didn't recognize her anymore. "What are you talking about? Are you a mother?" he said quietly. "You also taught Amy to love and protect her sister. I really can't understand why do you treat her like that. You don't deserve to be my mother. You don't deserve to be my wife. You don't deserve to be in this house. Go away. Take your only daughter with you. Tonight." Brenda's mouth twisted. "You're throwing us out? After everything?" "Pack your things," Harold said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the full weight of a father's fury. "Get out." Brenda snatched up her purse with a savage jerk. As she dragged Amy toward the door, she spun around one last time, her voice ragged with fury. "That child destroyed us!" she screamed, her hand slashing the air like a blade. "You think she's your little angel, but she's the reason we're broken. She ruined everything." The door slammed so hard behind them that the whole frame shuddered. Silence flooded the house like a tide. Harold stood alone in the ruins of what had once been his home, the echo of Brenda's final scream still vibrating in the walls. But in the midst of the wreckage, he felt something strange stir inside him. Not fear, not regret, but clarity. He knew now where his loyalty belonged, and it wasn't with the woman who had abandoned their child. It was with the little girl lying fragile and bruised in a hospital bed, still waiting for someone to truly come back for her. The hospital room was dim. The afternoon light filtered through heavy curtains, turning the world outside into a muted blur. Machines beeped softly, their steady rhythms the only sounds in the quiet. Harold sat in the chair by Anna's bed, his body stiff with exhaustion, but his hand never left hers. He watched the slow flutter of her eyelids, the way her small fingers twitched as if chasing something far away in a dream. And then, at last, Anna stirred. Her lashes lifted, heavy with sleep, and her eyes, those wide, wounded eyes, found Harold's face. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice raw and broken. Harold's heart twisted sharply, a pain deeper than anything he had known. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. Anna's hand tightened weakly around his. "Where's Mommy?" "And Amy?" "I miss them," she asked again, the tremble in her voice threading through the sterile air. Harold swallowed hard. He stroked her hair back gently from her forehead, feeling the slight warmth still clinging to her skin. "They're not here right now, baby," he said quietly, "but Daddy's here. I'm right here." Anna blinked slowly, confusion clouding her face, but she said nothing more. Her tiny body sagged against the mattress, drained by even that small effort. Harold sat back, his heart shattering with the helplessness of it. She missed them. Even after everything, she missed them. And that was what broke him the most. It took Harold less than 2 hours to find them. The town wasn't big, and there were only so many cheap motels on the outskirts where someone would go when they had nowhere else to land. He spotted Brenda's car, a battered Honda, parked unevenly outside a rundown motel with peeling paint and a flickering vacancy sign. Amy sat on the curb, picking at the hem of her jacket, her face pale and closed off. Harold pulled up, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cold air. Amy saw him first. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't move. Brenda emerged from the motel room, a paper cup of coffee clutched in her hands. When she saw Harold, she froze. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the cracked asphalt. "You're not supposed to be here," Brenda said finally, her voice flat. "I came because of Anna," Harold said, his voice low but unshakable. "She asked for you." Brenda looked away sharply, her mouth twisting. Harold stepped closer, each word weighted and deliberate. "Even after everything you did, she still loves you," he said. "I don't understand how. I don't understand why. You broke her, Brenda, you left her. And still, that little girl woke up asking for her mother." Brenda's face crumpled then, suddenly, violently, like a dam breaking. She sagged against the doorframe, the coffee cup slipping from her fingers and hitting the ground with a hollow thud. "I never wanted this," she choked. "I never wanted any of it." Harold said nothing. He simply waited, the cold wind tugging at the edges of his jacket. Brenda pressed her fists to her eyes, her shoulders shaking. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice breaking into ugly, gasping sobs. "4 years ago, when you were deployed to Hawaii, my boss, Wayne—" She couldn't finish. Harold's stomach dropped out from under him. Brenda dragged in a shuddering breath. "I was working overtime. It was late. He said he'd give me a ride home. I didn't see it coming. I didn't fight hard enough." Her voice cracked open on that last word. Harold closed his eyes, the horror of it slamming into him. "And Anna," Brenda said, her voice barely a whisper. "Anna came from that night." Silence pressed down on them, thick and merciless. "I couldn't tell you," Brenda sobbed. "I couldn't. How could I? You were gone. You were fighting for the country, and I was—" She choked on the words. "I was broken. And when Anna was born, every time I looked at her, I saw him." She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. "I tried, Harold. God, I tried. But I hated her. I hated her for existing, and I hated myself even more." Harold stood frozen, the weight of her confession crashing into every brittle part of him. He thought of Anna's shy smiles, her timid hands, her desperate, wordless love. None of it was her fault. None of it. And yet, she had borne the punishment every day of her short life. When Harold spoke, his voice was rough but steady. "Anna is innocent," he said. "She didn't ask for any of this. She didn't deserve what you did to her." Brenda nodded miserably, tears streaking her face. "I know," she whispered. "I know." Harold looked at her for a long, long moment. He didn't hate her. He pitied her. But pity would never be enough to erase what she had done. "You should get help," he said quietly, "because if you ever want even the smallest place in her life again, it won't be because she needs you. It'll be because you prove you deserve her." Brenda sagged against the doorway, sliding down until she sat hunched and broken on the cold concrete. Harold hugged her and patted her back. He didn't expect that he had protected his country and people, but to his family, he was just a terrible fool, the grey sky pressing low overhead. Totally miserable. Totally broken. The rain had eased into a soft, misting drizzle by the time Harold returned to the hospital. The city outside blurred into vague shapes and muted lights, a world that felt far away, insignificant compared to the tiny figure waiting for him upstairs. When he stepped back into Anna's room, she was awake. Not fully, not yet bright, but awake. She lay nestled under a light blanket, her head turned toward the window, her small body still fragile, but no longer frighteningly still. She looked up as Harold entered, her lips parting in a slow, drowsy smile. "Daddy," she whispered. Harold crossed the room in 3 long strides, sinking down beside her. "Hey, baby girl," he murmured, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Are you feeling a little better?" Anna nodded, her movements slow and sleepy. From the nightstand, Harold picked up the worn storybook Teresa had given her months ago, its spine taped and its cover faded from countless readings. He settled back in the chair, flipping to the first page. "Want me to read to you?" he asked softly. Anna's answer was a tiny, contented sigh. And so he read, his voice low, steady, wrapping her in the safe cocoon of words and warmth. He read until her eyelids drooped, until her breathing evened out again, until the fear and hurt seemed, for a moment, held at bay by the simple magic of being seen, of being loved. When she finally drifted into sleep, Harold stayed for a long time, just watching her, his heart aching with both love and guilt. He hadn't been there when she needed him most, but he was here now, and he would never leave her side again. Later that evening, Harold found Amy sitting stiffly on the waiting room couch, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her face pale and wary. He sat beside her, not speaking for a long moment. The silence stretched thin and brittle between them. Finally, he said, his voice gentle but firm, "We need to talk." Amy didn't move. She stared at the scuffed linoleum floor as if it could save her. "You're old enough to understand," Harold continued. "Family means we protect each other. We lift each other up, not tear each other down." Amy's shoulders trembled slightly, and she buried her face deeper into her knees. "Anna never hurt you," Harold said quietly. "She never deserved the way she was treated. And you're her big sister. She looks up to you, Amy. She still loves you, even after everything." At that, Amy let out a broken sob, small and sharp, like glass splintering. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought, Mum said—" "I know," Harold said, pulling her into a careful, protective hug. "You were confused. But it's not too late to be better. It's never too late to love her the way she deserves." Amy clutched at his jacket, crying harder now, the months of bitterness and fear and guilt pouring out of her in shuddering waves. "I want to see her," she gasped. "I want to tell her I'm sorry." Harold closed his eyes, breathing a quiet, shaking prayer of thanks. "We'll do it together," he promised. The next morning, after making sure Anna was resting safely under the care of the nurses, Harold made another call, a different one. This one was to an old friend, Officer Daniels, who had served with Harold once upon a time before trading fatigues for a badge. "Wayne Miller," Harold said when Daniels answered. "I need everything you can find on him." There was no hesitation. Daniels knew Harold's voice. He knew when it carried the sound of something serious. "I'll dig," he said, simply. Within days, the information began to pour in. Testimonies from former factory workers, whispers that had been ignored, allegations that had been laughed off, patterns of predatory behavior hidden under small-town politeness. Harold compiled every word, every statement, every trembling accusation into a file thicker than he had expected, and sicker than he had feared. Then, with steady hands and a heart burning with righteous anger, Harold filed an official complaint. There would be no more silence. There would be no more hiding. Wayne Miller was arrested on a bleak Thursday morning. The sight of him being led in handcuffs across the courthouse steps, his smug expression stripped away under the harsh glare of justice, sent a fierce, silent satisfaction through Harold's chest. It wasn't everything. It wouldn't erase the pain. But it was a beginning. A small flame of justice flickering in the cold aftermath of betrayal. And Harold swore, as he watched the police car disappear down the street, he would build a life for his family, from the ashes, one slow, careful step at a time, because they deserved nothing less. And because now, finally, he understood what standing up really meant. The morning sun flooded the Clark household with a golden light so soft it seemed almost unreal, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for years and was only now remembering how to breathe again. In the living room, laughter echoed, light, bright, healing. Harold leaned against the doorway, watching as Amy and Anna sprawled across the worn rug, a scattering of colored pencils and half-finished drawings between them. Anna was giggling uncontrollably as Amy attempted to draw a cat, but the sketch looked more like a lopsided potato. "You're terrible at this," Anna squeaked, laughing so hard her cheeks flushed pink. Amy grinned sheepishly and threw a pillow at her, earning a delighted shriek. For a long moment, Harold simply watched, his throat tightening. He had once wondered if he would ever see this, the easy joy, the bond of sisters, the fragile trust weaving itself back together, one careful thread at a time. He stepped quietly away, giving them their space, and headed to his desk, where a thick manila folder awaited him. Inside were the finalized documents. His reassignment. No more tours overseas, no more leaving them behind. He was staying. For good. Harold signed the papers with a steady hand, each stroke a vow to his daughters, to himself. He would be the father they deserved. No more running, no more absence disguised as duty. Family came first, now and always. That evening, after dinner, peanut butter sandwiches and apple slices, simple and perfect, Harold sat beside Anna on the couch, her small body tucked into his side. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls. He hesitated, then asked, his voice almost too soft to hear, "Anna, do you ever feel angry at Mommy?" Anna looked up at him, her wide brown eyes serious and searching. "No," she said, as if the answer were obvious. "If I hate Mommy, that makes me a bad child." The innocence of it, the aching purity, carved a raw, painful ache into Harold's heart. He swallowed hard, pulling her closer. "No, baby," he whispered. "You never bad like that. You deserve love, safety, and a happiness family." Anna smiled sleepily, resting her head against his chest. And Harold made another silent promise to himself in that moment, as sacred as any battlefield vow. He would never let darkness touch his family again. Not as long as there was breath in his body. The next few weeks passed in slow, careful steps. Harold didn't rush it. He couldn't. Healing, he knew now, wasn't a thing you demanded. It was something you built with patience, with humility, with love. And so, when he drove to the psychological clinic where Brenda was undergoing counseling, he didn't barge in with anger or judgment. He brought coffee, and quiet, and time. At first, Brenda barely looked at him during the visits. She sat curled into herself, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, her eyes rimmed with shadows he hadn't noticed when he was younger and blinder. But Harold stayed. Sometimes he just sat silently in the waiting room. Sometimes he read aloud from the newspaper, his voice low and even. Sometimes he talked about Anna, about Amy, about the little joys of their days. And slowly, achingly slowly, Brenda began to talk back. One afternoon, as the sun melted into a soft peach behind the windows, Brenda looked at him fully for the first time. "I don't deserve it," she said hoarsely. "Any of it." Harold leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "I loved you," he said, his voice thick. "I still love the part of you that's hurting. That part that got lost along the way." Tears slid silently down Brenda's cheeks. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I didn't know how to survive it. How to survive myself." Harold nodded, his own throat burning. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for not seeing you were drowning, for not being here when you needed me." Brenda covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly, and Harold sat with her, not as a husband demanding forgiveness, but as a man who finally understood how deep wounds could run. There were no dramatic declarations, no sudden mending of broken things, just two people sitting in the wreckage, trying to find their way back to something like peace. Back home, as night settled over the house like a soft quilt, Harold tucked Anna and Amy into bed, kissed their foreheads, and turned off the light. In the quiet darkness, he stood for a long moment, listening to their even breathing. Outside, the stars blinked faintly behind thin clouds. Healing would come, slowly, tenderly, imperfectly. But it would come, and this time, Harold Clark would be there to see it through, all the way home. The morning air smelled of fresh earth and new beginnings. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves outside the Clark house, sending tiny whirlwinds skittering across the porch. Sunlight poured through the windows, warm and golden, filling every corner of the house, with a quiet, pulsing life. Harold stood by the window, his hands tucked deep into his pockets, watching the long drive that led up from the street. Today was the day. After months of therapy, after endless hours of doubt and slow, grinding work, Brenda had been cleared for a supervised visit. Not a return. Not yet. Just a beginning. Harold's stomach twisted with nerves as he caught sight of the old county car pulling into the driveway, Brenda seated stiffly in the back seat. The engine idled for a moment before shutting off. Brenda stepped out, her movements hesitant, almost mechanical. She wore a plain sweater and jeans, her hair tied back, her face thinner than he remembered, stripped of all pretense, raw in its vulnerability. She stood frozen at the foot of the porch, as if unsure whether she was welcome to take another step. The screen door creaked open. And then, "Mummy?" Anna's small voice rang out, piercing the hush like a songbird after a long winter. Before anyone could react, Anna bolted across the porch, her feet bare, her arms flung wide. Brenda barely had time to crouch before Anna crashed into her, wrapping tiny arms tightly around her legs. For a heartbeat, Brenda just stood there, frozen, her hands hovering uselessly above Anna's head. Then something inside her cracked wide open. With a shuddering cry, Brenda dropped to her knees on the worn wooden steps, gathering Anna into her arms, clinging to her as if trying to fuse their broken pieces back together. She sobbed into Anna's hair, deep, wrenching sobs that racked her body, stripped of pride, stripped of shame. Anna only hugged her tighter, her small hands patting Brenda's back, her voice a soft murmur against her ear. "I missed you, Mommy. I missed you so much." Harold watched from the doorway, his heart twisting painfully in his chest. Beside him, Amy stood silently, tears gleaming unshed in her wide eyes. She reached for Harold's hand and squeezed it tightly. Harold knelt down, wrapping an arm around Amy's shoulders, pulling her into his side as they watched mother and daughter sob and cling to each other in the morning light. For the first time, in a very long time, Harold felt something stir deep inside him. Something fragile, something battered but alive. Hope. Not the blinding, naive hope of before. A quieter, braver hope, forged in fire and heartache. They would never be the same family they once were. Too much had been broken. Too much had been lost. But maybe, just maybe, they could become something stronger, something more honest, something built, not on perfection, but on forgiveness. That afternoon, after Brenda's visit ended and the house settled into a quiet hum of life. Again. Harold stood by the window once more, watching Anna chase Amy around the yard, their laughter curling up into the wide blue sky. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass, closing his eyes. There were still mountains to climb, still wounds to heal, still nights when the past would claw at the edges of peace. But they were moving forward, together. And sometimes, Harold thought, that was all you could ask for. And sometimes, it was enough. How do you feel about today's story if you witness your loved one being treated unfairly by another family member? Angry, confused, or heartbroken? But it's certainly not pleasant, and no one wants to be in that situation. So today, are you satisfied with Harold's way of doing things? We think Harold's selflessness, strength, and admitting his mistakes to his family is worthy of praise. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If it's dark, go to bed early and put your phones away. It will help you sleep better. If it's light, have a nice day. See you in the next videos.